All right, let's go ahead and do it. Let's get to Norman, Oklahoma, LSU versus Oklahoma. Connor, feels like a very bad matchup for the places that LSU struggling. Oklahoma is elite now. LSU's defense, I think, gives them an opportunity to try to pull off some crazy upset because Oklahoma's offense is not exactly world beaters either. This feels like it could be a good old 2006 14-10 game.
This is an Iowa game. This really is. I mean, the over-under is 36.5 points.
It just keeps going down too.
Yeah, and look, I'm even surprised it's still that high. Like if this ends up at like 34 points, it's not going to stun me because 24-10, you could easily picture that. You're like, oh wow, Oklahoma's going to score 3 touchdowns. Maybe not. Do you know how hard it is to be a double-digit underdog with a spread that low? I mean, it's darn near impossible to have an over/under that low. I should say.
Yeah,
it is truly stunning to think about how much this LSU offense has struggled. I know it's very well documented on your airwaves, but it's going into a hornet's nest. That's what this Oklahoma defense has been, because early on they couldn't force any turnovers. There was one time where they went into that Kent State game as the only FBS team that hadn't forced a turnover yet, which was baffling for a defense that good. And in the last 3 games where they've beat nothing but AP top 25 teams, they've got an 8-2 advantage in the turnover margin. So they've been able to do that. They've been able to get the chunk plays with Isaiah Satania, and John Mateer is going to be relied on a ton in this game. This is an empty the tank game for John Mateer. And what has the Blake Baker defense struggled with historically? It's been mobile quarterbacks. And so that's why I think this is a difficult matchup for LSU. And yes, all the pressure in the world is on Oklahoma. Brent Venables, you cannot lose this game to an interim coach with an LSU team that has had all of its hopes and aspirations wiped off the table. You cannot ruin your playoff path with a home loss like this. I don't think that ends up happening, though, and I think it's too difficult of a matchup for LSU. They need a non-offensive touchdown and maybe a miracle to win this game.
All right, well, let's get outside of the game that's coming up because, LSU is going to have to play its very best, I think, to get the victory there in Norman. But let's just look at LSU moving forward. What is your take on all the craziness that's going on surrounding the potential new LSU head coach, whoever that might be it Lane Kiffin or someone else? It's always great to get an outside perspective on this because obviously, like boots on the ground here, you're hearing every single rumor. What do you think at the end of the day, Connor, happens?
I think LSU thinks they have Lane Kiffin. Now, whether or not that's going to be the case, I would not bet my life on that whatsoever. I'm still on record saying I think Lane returns, but LSU seems to think that Lane is indeed going to be theirs. And, if this Eli Drinkowitz deal happens, to me, that would be more confirmation that Lane is leaving, because I would tend to think that if Lane isn't going to be going to LSU, that would be the place that ultimately LSU would want to turn. We've talked about this before, but to me, I think there are so many dominoes that are waiting to fall with this Lane Kiffin situation. And if we do actually get this announcement 24 hours after the Egg Bowl was played, and we're aware of where he's going to end up by Saturday morning, then I think everybody else is going to look around, and all of a sudden these moves are going to start happening left and right. But man, it sure seems like LSU feels like it has Lane Kiffin. Now, I had talked to people that felt like Florida had Lane in the bag, and like there was a better chance than not that he was going to end up there on some historic contract. I think what's very clear is that Lane is not going to be picking these places for money. It feels like the money is going to be the same at all of these, these 3 schools that he's considering. But man, everything that it seems like is coming out makes it seem like LSU feels like it has the best chance to land Lane Kiffin.
All right. And you still think your gut, though, that he goes back to Ole Miss?
Yeah, I do. And maybe that's dumb. And, maybe I'll just go down on the Titanic with that one. But you can just picture this. You can picture this announcement coming on Saturday morning, and maybe it's Lane going on College Game Day, and it's Keith Carter in the background. And Lane just does a very Lane thing to announce, I'm not going anywhere, I'm coming back. This was always the plan. That shouldn't surprise anyone at this point, even if he's made these people, these decision makers, feel like he's ending up at their school. But it's just all very Lane. It is so Lane, this entire process, and it could end in a very Lane way. And maybe the new Lane is actually deciding he wants a hero's welcome, and he wants, the hero's return, and he wants to be able to come back to Oxford, knowing that he considered these possibilities, but ultimately he's found his forever home at Ole Miss.
All right, if Lane Kiffin does stay at Ole Miss, which is certainly a possibility, where do you think LSU goes?
I would think that it's still on the table for Kenny Dillingham. I would think that that's still an option because I know that they've talked about, getting him a new contract, and he's told recruits like he's coming back and everything. I think he's too good of a coach to just, say, you know what, I guess he likes it there. I guess we won't, kick the tires at all. I think even if you're at home and even if you're a place where you feel like this is my job, I owe so much to this university, I do think that there are still a few of those jobs that you consider. And I can't help but think that Kenny Dillingham would love the possibility of going to a big time place like LSU. I look at his situation right now and think that he's got total alignment there, and that would be all well and good, but it's very different recruiting in the recruiting pool that LSU has to work with as opposed to the one that he has at Tempe. And I just think that he would be the one that LSU would want to just essentially push all of the chips into the middle and say, let's go out and get him, especially if Eli Drinkowitz ultimately wants to stay at Mizzou. So I think that they would still be swinging big, but, everything is going to feel like a loss for whoever doesn't end up with Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. I mean, just because you've, pushed all your chips to the middle of the table there. So if you don't, then there's going to be at least a little bit of a time period where you have some disappointment, even though this. I think Kenny Dillingham is an absolute star, and I think any team would be lucky to have him. So we'll see where that ends up. What about Florida? What about the Gators? If they don't get Lane Kiffin, where do you think the Gators go? And also, it is so quiet on the Plains, which is never quiet there. And
right.
It's I don't know. I'm kind of nervous about like what's going to happen there. Nervous because I think they actually might be doing it the right way.
Yeah, Jake. I think that this ends up with John Summerall at Auburn. I'll until I'm told that he's not going to that job, I'm going to assume he's going to that job. Right. And I think the meeting called off with Florida, it was never on the table. It wasn't whatever. I think that ultimately we're going to see a relatively straightforward path, dare I say, to Auburn hiring a football coach. What a crazy concept.
That's
and then
really
Florida,
crazy.
Yeah, I just talked about Kenny Dillingham leaving home and potentially ending up at LSU if LSU doesn't get Lane Kiffin. I think Brent Key could still end up at Florida. I really do. And I know that last week was really, really rough to watch the way that it ended for Georgia Tech. Their potential playoff push. They can still get some chaos and get to the ACC championship. I realize that. But I still think that Scott Strickland is enamored by Brent Key.
Yeah.
And I do think that a guy making $4.5 million, there is still going to be a real appeal for him to want to go to a state that he spent a lot of time in. And he can say all he wants, cut me open and see what colors I bleed.
Right.
I think that's all well and good, but until you say I'm coming back, I'm not going anywhere, I still think that that's on the table, and I still think that Florida would be willing to come over the top to get a coach like him. So I think that that's where they would turn if ultimately they're on the outside looking in at the Lane Kiffin sweepstakes.
All right. If Lane Kiffin stays at Ole Miss, LSU gets Kenny Dillingham, and Auburn gets John Summerall. Rank those 1 through 3.
Oh man, I think if you get Dillingham to LSU, that's one. That's one to me. I would probably still go with Summerall at 2, and I'd consider him at 1. I really do think he's that good. Like, he's 15-3 in one-score games. Like, he just seems to be a guy that kind of gets it. I love that he comes out here and does the thing that nobody's willing to do and say, instead of saying his team deserves a shot at the college football playoff, he's like, if we're the highest ranked Group of 5 team, that's saying a lot about the Group of 5 because we're not a good enough team to warrant that. I love that, man. Like, I think he just kind of gets it. And I do think that there are going to be people that look back on this cycle and wonder, man, was John Summerall the Dan Lanning that was just sitting right there that you kind of could have had, and instead he ends up doing great things at a place like Auburn. So, and that's not to discount Brent Key, because I do think that would be a fantastic hire for Florida with the type of identity that he's been able to bring to Georgia Tech. The fact that he just every single time, stares down Kirby Smart in these games and makes them fist fights. Like, I just tend to think that Brent Key is going to have a lot more success, in the rest of the decade wherever he ends up. So I would probably go that order 1 through 3, but there's not a whole lot of separation between those 3 guys, in my opinion.
All right, there he is, our guy, Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South. Good enough to join us here. Connor, fantastic stuff as always. Enjoy the holiday, sir, with your family.
Thanks, man. We'll talk soon.